as a professional, it's really important to think about where you draw from different areas of your professional life, your research, qualifications and training, to actually evidence what you do as a professional. So I want you just to think about for a moment, how would I know if I was observing you in your work that you make ethical decisions? How do you do that? How do you actually engage in ethical decision making? When you think about the work that you do, how do you know what skills to use or what body of knowledge to draw from? If I was also observing you, how would I know that you're reflecting on your work whilst you're working with clients or consumers or customers? And how would I know that you reflect before you go into that piece of work or a visit with the client and when you come out of that? One of the things that we do in community human services is that we tend to reflect on a surface level. So that's thinking about, what went really well, what could have been different. What I'm actually asking you to think about is reflection and kind of that insight skill development or insight skill exploration on a whole different level. So the great thing is about having a professional framework for your role or your practice in community human services is really, really crucial. So as I'm taking you through this activity, it's really important to think about some of those questions. How do you do what you do? How do you know to do what you do? And where do you draw those things from? So today I want to show you and take you through how we explore your professional framework for your role and the practices that you do. I want you to think for a moment, as I'm kind of reading from this manual that we usually use in the supervision training coaching, how do you actually evidence what you do as a professional? So it doesn't matter what role that you're in. You might be in an administrative role, HR role, clinical role, professional role. How do you actually think about your role where you draw your skills and knowledge from and what you do? So just for a moment, I'd like you to think about some of these questions, and as you're hearing me read out these reflective questions, just jot down what comes to your mind. Then when we see you in training, we'll actually explore these in more detail. So if I was observing you in your role, what do you see as your ethical decision-making process or framework that you use in your work on a day-to-day basis, and more particularly with the clients or families that you work with? How do you think you have developed your professional identity? What might be the parts of your professional identity that I would see you using in your work, in your teamwork, and in your organisation? What are the key practice skills that you actually use with your clients, and why do you choose particular skills or particular ways of working at a particular time? If you're a supervisor and you're watching this, what guides or informs your supervisory practice? Because as we know, professional supervision, clinical supervision, line management supervision requires a whole bunch of professional skills, body of knowledge and set of competencies. How do you draw in your training or professional development into your role, and any learning that you have from training or professional development, how do you then transfer that back into your role that then in turn evidences what you do? How does the organisational structure influence how you do? It might be around policies or procedures. And then finally, I'd like you to think about what actually informs your professional knowledge. Now, these are all important things that we need to be asking ourselves as a professional as we go about our day-to-day work, and particularly because of some of the complex clients and families that we work with and the really important work that we do. What I'd like you to think about is all those questions, and as you're jotting down ideas, it's really great to think about, what does that picture look like that really informs what I do? And then picking up all those answers, I'd like to show you on the board an activity that you can do as a supervisor or as a professional to really think about how you develop your professional framework in your role and the practices that you do. So what I'd like to do today is take you through the 6 key areas that actually make up your professional framework in the role that you have, and particularly if you're working directly with clients, customers or consumers. So let's have a look at the first area in your professional framework. Firstly, we look at professional skills. So, what I'd like you to think about right now is, where do you draw your professional skills from? If I was noticing you in your work, where would I notice you drawing those from? And then the second question is, what are the professional skills that you have? So what I'd like you to think about right now, and after we finish looking at the 6 key areas, is to jot down, number 1, where you draw your professional skills from. And the second area is, which is a little bit more difficult, what are all those professional skills that you have that you bring into your work consciously on a daily basis. So the second area I'd like to look at with you today is your professional body of knowledge. So number 2 in your professional framework is your professional knowledge. Again, I'll ask you the same question. So as you're really hearing this, to think about, where do you draw your professional knowledge from that I would see you using in your role? And secondly, I'd like you to think about and jot down, what is the professional body of knowledge that you have that really sets you apart in your role that you use on a daily basis? So again, those 2 questions, where do you draw your professional knowledge from? And what is that professional knowledge that you use on a daily basis? Okay, let's move on to number 3. So, number 3 in our professional framework for the practices that we do is all around research and also some of the theories that we use. Now, you may be in an administrative role, you might be in a research role, a policy role. There are still theories and ideas that you draw from to do what you do in your role. So I'd like you to think about, where do you draw from in the research? It might be reading, it might be even things around social media. Where do you draw from so that you know what to use in your role, from what the best practice is around your role, or if you're in a clinical role, what the evidence base says about what you draw into the role that you have? So again, that first question is, where do I draw that from? And the second question is, well, what are those things that I draw from the research and theories to do what I do in my role? That one's a little bit more tricky, but have a really good go at it, because when we get to the training, we'll actually explore it in more detail. You might like to talk to others in your team about that, so you get a really good idea that you've got some really great things jotted down before we see you in the training. So, in our professional framework, let's look at number 4. This is a really important one. This is all around our beliefs and our values. Now, if you're in a role where you're not required to draw from best practice or research or some of the things that are in our reading, like journal articles or even some of the great stuff that we actually get through the net or social media, then you may be falling back to your personal beliefs and values in your role to actually undertake your role. So this is a really important one to spend a bit of time on. So again, the question for you to think about is, where do I draw my beliefs and values from to do my role? And then the second question is to jot down, what are those specific beliefs and values that interface, influence, or impact in your role? There'll be positive beliefs, there'll be limiting beliefs, there'll be self-talk, there'll be things from your family of origin, there'll be things from culture. So I'm kind of giving you a bit of a hint of the things to think about in beliefs and values. So area number 4 is really crucial. Let's have a look at number 5. Number 5, I really think is equally as important. Okay, professional identity. Another really interesting area to explore. So again, I'll ask you the question, if I was observing you in your work, what would I notice about your professional identity? Where do you draw that from? What are the areas that make up your professional identity? And the second question is really equally as important. What is your professional identity? Well, what are those components that I make up, etc.? So I want you to have a think about those two questions, because having a professional identity is your brand, it's your logo, it's also, I'll give you a bit of a hint, it's about your integrity, credibility, it's about your attributes. They're all the things in the sector that people will look at us as professionals and go, that person is really ethical, that person is reliable and has integrity. So your professional identity is the way that other people see you in the sector. And the final area, really important, one we can't do without, is number 6, which is all the organisational context. So, again, we explore the question of, where do I draw from in my organisational context to do what I do as a professional, and what are the things that are really important in the organisational context? I'll give you another hint, like policies and procedures, legislation, standards, etc., that I absolutely have to bring into my role to be the professional that I am. So let's just recap those again. Area number 1 is your professional skills. Area number 2 is your professional body of knowledge. Area number 3 is everything around the research, the theories that you use in your role. Your beliefs and values is at number 4. Number 5 is your professional identity. And number 6 is the organisational context. Now, while you're going through this, you might want to think about, what are the areas that are really important for me? Are some of those areas, do I need to change them? Or do I absolutely need to add a number 7 or 8? Entirely up to you. But I want you to spend some time reflecting on that. And the other key thing is, by the time we get together in the training, I'd really like you to think about, what is the visual that comes to your mind for your professional framework? And if you feel as though that you've got a really good idea what that is, can you kind of construct or put together what that visual is and bring it along to the training? What we're going to do when we get to the training very shortly is that we will actually quickly go through what you've discovered about you as a professional with your professional framework, and we'll actually look at some of those key things that belong in each of those 6 areas. And for any of you that go that next step to develop your visual, I'd really love to see them in the training and really explore what you have thought about as you've reflected on this particular activity in preparation for your training. Have a bit of fun with it, talk to other professionals about it, and I'll look forward to seeing you really soon.